Hey, what's up, everybody? This is David Gino from the VR Report. I have a very special guest, Mr. Philip Rosedale. He is best known for being the creator of Second Life. Philip, can you please introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Well, that's me. I'm the creator of Second Life. After that, High Fidelity, and now I have a lab called IRL Full and Fun.
You know, you've been through this journey, especially when we're talking about virtual worlds. You started this whole thing around the metaverse, right? And before we jump into it, can you kind of share your story of how that even began?
Sure. As a kid, I loved computers. I learned to program when I was in middle school, and that was before the internet. So, as I played with computers, I got really interested in simulation. The idea that, you could somehow kind of redo the laws of physics in one way or another inside a computer and then make a big playground and watch what happened in that playground. And, in 1994, the internet happened, and kind of as a kid who had been dreaming about simulating things, when I saw the internet happen, my first thought was like, well, now we could make a really big simulation, by connecting together a lot of computers over the internet and simulating an enormous world. And so the kind of backstory to Second Life was I wanted to not so much to build a video game, but more to create a sandbox or a playground where there were some sort of laws of physics and an ability to make and do and build things, and then sort of open it up and watch what people would do in it. Well, that was the thing I couldn't get out of my mind for years, and eventually was able to realize with Second Life.
Fantastic. And of course, at this time, you became the CTO of Real Networks,
Mm-hmm.
which is focused on audio.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about? From 1994, you're experimenting with computers.
Yeah.
I read somewhere you actually bought your first computer at IMEX on a swap meet.
Yeah.
How was that journey to Real?
Well, the important thing about Real Networks is when I moved to San Francisco in 1994, and the timing was perfect. I had just finished college. I was very entrepreneurial with computers. I already had my own business using computers, and I got here and discovered the internet. But at the same time, I realized that the idea of making a three-dimensional virtual world with avatars walking around doing things was totally impossible in 94. And the reason for that was really two things. One was that computers were, they didn't really have 3D graphics back then. So as we all remember, there were really early things like Doom, but it was fake 3D. It wasn't really, computers weren't fast enough yet to do complicated 3D environments. And then the second thing was that broadband hadn't happened yet. And so everything was dial-up. And so while I actually, as early as the early 90s, very much wanted to create something like Second Life, I recognized that I couldn't do it then. And so in trying to figure out what to do instead, I started thinking about transmitting audio and video over the internet. And so in 1994 and 1995, I wrote a little piece of software with a friend of mine. It was called Preview. You can look it up in the Wayback Machine. And we put up a very early video conferencing system that would basically just let you call anybody from anywhere in the world using those little funny cameras that looked like a tennis ball that sat on top of your then big monitor. And so that was the thing that I did that I thought was possible to do in the early 90s. And then that led me to selling myself and my friend and my little company to Real Networks, where I became I was the kid who was hired to build a video product on top of what was then their audio products. And I later became the CTO and helped the company as we went public and grew a lot. And, I learned a lot about engineering management and, of course, about, media and internet technology and compression and routing and streaming and all the sorts of things that I think I needed to know to be able to build something as big and complicated as Second.
And then Second Life occurred because of the advent of 3D graphics, the GE2 graphics card, GeForce 2
right,
graphics
exactly.
card. And graphics was, brand new at that time. It was kind of phenomenal in terms of that. It's almost like magic.
Yeah.
When was that transition? What happened to get you to Second Life? Was there an MVP? Well, how did that journey even happen to where you had a 3D world?
Well, like you said, NVIDIA released the GeForce 2 in 99 in broad. That in 99 was when if you bought a Gateway or a Dell computer, desktop computer back then, you got a GeForce too. So that was kind of the critical moment that I remember. I remember like getting one of those machines, I think it was like a Dell or something, and putting it up in my, upstairs in my house and like just starting to play on it and see if I could figure out, how this 3D stuff worked. So that was one thing. And then the second thing was in the cities, broadband became dominant in 99. And so with those two observations, I quit my job at Real Networks and came back to San Francisco and started Linden Lab, a company that made Second Life in Hayes Valley, not far from where we are right now.
It's fantastic. I think during that time, there was a lot of things, just in case you're wondering, Philip's in Halloween garb. Today's Halloween. And he's been gracious enough to spend some time with me today. During that time in San Francisco was kind of a revolutionary. The advent of broadband, 3D graphics, the whole idea of community. At that time, rave culture started coming into effect with Burning Man and warehouse parties. How much did that influence you in the early days? Because a lot of tech founders got caught up in that culture and really invigorated them to create a lot of the technologies that we see today. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, my experience of it was that the San Francisco that I lived in from 94 when I got here until probably about maybe 2005, or around the time that Second Life launched and around the time that Facebook launched. And that I kind of think of it simplistically as sort of two phases. That first phase was the phase where none of us knew if the internet was really going to work. Like you said, a lot of us were certainly not motivated by promise of, getting rich or anything. It was more that we were these strange people who were fascinated by the internet and fascinated by technology and doing things like going to raves and warehouse parties in San Francisco and going to Burning Man and things like that. But there was this really wonderful feeling in the 90s where we didn't think a lot of the things we were building would work, and we didn't care. There was a playfulness to it, and there was also really good intent. I think that the early entrepreneurs on the internet were, for the most part, just trying to sort of publish information where there really wasn't any information. The world felt dark, when the internet started in the early 90s. And by dark, I mean, nothing was published. You couldn't see anything. Everything was opaque. And I think a lot of the enthusiasm of the early internet pioneers, things like eBay and Real Networks and Wikipedia and systems like that, were entrepreneurs that just wanted to get stuff out there and make stuff accessible to people using the internet in a way that, they could never have, found that information or done that thing before. Around about 2000, the early 2000s, it became apparent that everybody was going to get very rich doing this. There was just going to be like staggering amount of value created by this stuff, which was weird, I must say. And then the other thing that happened, was the business plans and the motivations of many of the internet companies kind of shifted. And I think it really, I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but I think it corresponded with the business of advertising, and particularly personalized targeted advertising. As soon as we got into that idea that we could know who you were and show you a specific ad based on what we knew about you, not what website you were on, but what we knew about you, there was a real badness to that. It was kind of the vanguard of taking things in a bad direction for the next 10 or 15 years now. As someone old enough to remember that in the mid 90s, the early 90s, I really want to encourage us all to remember that, technology doesn't have to be bad. In fact, at that time, it seemed like most things we could do with technology and the internet were pretty good. And so I think it's really important to come back to that and realize that we can get back there. The last 10 or 15 years are just kind of an unfortunate little side road we've been down that we can back out of and go somewhere else.
I totally agree with that. And I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? And in the early days, Linden Lab was also the forerunners around digital currency with Linden Dollars.
Right.
And from recent reports, Second Life still generates tons of revenue based on selling virtual land, renting out cloud, versus an ad model.
Yeah.
So your thesis is, hey, look, we don't have to do ad targeting to get to know people, because there's already enough value if we are going to create this metaverse to sell real estate like we do in the real world. Question that I had is that I believe in that future, right? But at the same time, it's not about the revenue, about the ads. It's more about what the preferences are. It's more about who they know, and they can mine the data from that person.
Right.
So how do we still create profitable businesses with that dichotomy when the cat's already out?
Yeah. Well, like you said, let's go back and look at one thing. Second Life Linden Labs is a private company, and so we don't talk about our revenues, but I can say that we've made billions of dollars at this point over the last 20 years, making a virtual world for people. And like you said, people pay for Second Life with fees. They basically pay for hosting in the cloud, like you said. And that business turns out to be a great business. We make more money from each person that uses Second Life than, for example, Google or Facebook do in advertising. We make more money. So what that means is you don't have to manipulate people through personalized ads to make a really good business. Second Life is a really, really good business, and it has been for a long time. And what's more, because of its economic system, it's created a far larger business for the people who have used it. So, where the company has made, like more than $1 billion at this point, the people using Second Life have made something between like $5 and $10 billion, buying and selling things from each other in the virtual world. So it is entirely possible to build technology services that are very good for people, that are economically profitable, and that don't involve manipulating people, causing harm, screwing up democracy and politics through advertising.
I believe that as a strong value proposition. I just have doubts of human society as a whole. You brought up the thesis of what Elon's doing with X today. What Elon had done to police, people to persuade people, or at least be able to manage the people having these discussions on X. There's a philosophy that we can have that done through communities themselves, like we do in real life. And I heard an example that you provided. Like in real life, you're judged by the physical groups that you might congregate with, or analogy of going into a party. There's certain rules and etiquette that you would have to do, and you'd be judged by peers on how you should be acting. But again, when people are behind anonymous, or at least pseudo-anonymous online, they still can act in bad behavior ways. But you were at the forefront of this at Second Life. How are you able to then manage that and still have to create an open and socially acceptable type of environment where people don't feel discriminated or ostracized by some kind of agenda?
Yeah. Well, like you said earlier, you've just given me more stuff to unpack there. It would take us hours. But fundamentally, like in the real world, we can build virtual worlds that cause us to treat each other well in the same way that we do typically and statistically most of the time in the real world. And like you said, one of the first ideas is, and this is kind of from the beginning how we had to build Second Life, which is different than say something like Twitter, because the difference is that Second Life people have enormously more power there. Everybody can build everything. I can bust out a motorcycle and put it right here and then jump on it and ride away or run over you. All of these, the power that you have that's necessary for a virtual world to be interesting also means that you have to bring people together with great power and then figure out ways for them to get along, which is a very different proposition than something like Facebook or Twitter, where you're basically really just looking at the timeline of stuff people are posting and then busting them if they behave badly, right? And that's a very top-down idea. But the real world is a situation like what we're doing right now, right? We're very close to each other right now, in a room, in an office in which there are other people, on a street on which there are cars, and in the city, et cetera. It kind of bubbles up from there. If I do something to upset you, the first person that I have to be concerned about is you, because we're both real people that are here. We're within arm's reach of each other. We are obliged, by physicality to treat each other with respect. You can do the same thing in a virtual world, and that's what we did in Second Life, for example, by using the right kind of pseudonymous identity, for example, and the right kind of balance of power between people. You can make it work. Second Life is a very positive place, but it's tricky, and you have to do things much more like the real world, kind of from the bottom up. It starts with you and me, and then if we still can't resolve our differences, well, we can ask the landlord, and then if we still can't, we can ask the police, and so on. And of course, I believe that virtual worlds in the future, metaverses, will be built in exactly the same way. And I think Second Life is a pretty good prototype of that, at least to take a look at as we start to build these things.
It's fantastic, because we met when you were just starting High Fidelity, and High Fidelity was going to be focusing on really what the metaverse, what everyone's been talking about that dream of being in a full 3D immersive environment with head-mounted display. Was that the thesis for high fidelity that you wanted to get across? Like, hey, you can do this without an ad-generated model, but create a virtual world where you would be judged based on like your social reputation.
Yep. I mean, with high fidelity, high fidelity was kind of in some ways a new thing, kind of beyond Second Life, with a couple of goals in mind. One was that it would be even more open source and bigger in scale, both in terms of how many people would be in a room at one time, how everybody could run the servers rather than one company having to run all the servers. And then the other big change was it was designed from the beginning to be used with the VR devices, as you and I both know a lot about. And so that was the premise that we would create. We would build a whole new experience that was much more immersive and interactive because it was first and foremost designed to be used with VR headsets.
Fantastic. And then high fidelity pivoted.
Right.
Let everyone know what happened there.
Yeah. Well, what happened was the VR headsets didn't work, not for the kind of experience that Second Life is, or the kind of experience we wanted to create with high fidelity. And I can say the most interesting, I think we all know the easy reasons why that's true. I mean, we all know that VR headsets turned out to be harder than we thought. They're too heavy. You can't use your phone while you're wearing them. Hard to type. You can't convey body language and information as well as we can right now. I think the more nuanced thing, though, that I say a lot because I think it's so culturally important right now, is that you don't feel comfortable being blindfolded in a room where there might be other people. That's true for all of us. So that means I believe that the reason why your Quest is probably sitting in a closet somewhere, if you're, listening to this, the reason for that isn't that the Quest isn't an amazing VR device. It is an amazing device, even with its flaws. It's that you don't feel safe when you're wearing it. And I think that means that you shy away from doing it. And the bad part, and this is what I wanted to get to, is not everybody feels the same degree of unsafety as everybody else. I said that poorly, but some people feel a lot less safe than others wearing a headset. What does that mean? And that means that the sort of people that are comfortable wearing the headset more than others are going to homogenize the kind of people that end up in the virtual world. Second Life is almost a perfect balance with respect to gender, age, geography, political views, everything. It's just a total mishmash, wonderful, of different people. The people that are willing to put on a VR headset, especially for a long period of time, unfortunately end up being a small subset of those groups. And so I didn't want to try to create another big virtual social world where it was really homogenous in terms of who was comfortable doing it. And so that was one of the biggest reasons why we made the decision, both from a business and personal standpoint, that we just didn't think we could build a virtual world around the VR headset.
That makes sense. I have a friend, Monica Jo, who I interviewed several years ago about her being married in Second Life. She was the first one to ever get married in the virtual world.
Wonderful.
And was in Second Life. And someone like Monica wouldn't wear a headset, just because, hey, it's a little bit heavy. I don't know. Have you tried the Quest 3 yet? No.
I haven't. In fact, I was supposed to have one today. I'll have one in another couple of days.
Fantastic. Well, I brought it just for you because I think people's perceptions, and I always have the litmus test with my partner. She has seen me throughout my career, experimenting with all these different types of headsets and different versions, even from gesture tracking with Leap Motion. And she's been my litmus test of when is she going to adopt this?
Totally.
And I think with the Quest 3, we're actually at that stage where it's just good enough where that pass-through feels okay, but the weight is still there.
Yeah.
But I think this is now just at least a roadmap where you can see, well, pass-through is now working when people feel comfortable, and that whole isolation feeling. Like CEOs, when you're giving pitches to a big board meeting, if you're not in that space, you're definitely not going to don a headset and figure out how to read the room.
Yep. Exactly.
So, we may not.
I hope
time.
so.
I
hope
so.
I want to try it on.
Yeah. But the point that I was trying to get at is I think we're getting close. And the reason why I felt really like a good, warm, fuzzy feeling when we were back at Linden Labs leading the charge at Second Life is I actually thought that was going to be now the new direction. Actually, maybe there's a partnership on the way with the Quest. Maybe it was with Apple. But what I'm getting from you, that's probably not in the immediate future.
No, I don't think it is. I do think, though, and I've written about this a lot lately, that we can probably actually add a sort of an in-between stage while we're waiting for the VR headsets to get good enough for us to be able to wear them all the time and communicate with each other. Like you said, to get a CEO comfortable speaking to their board, the headset. That's a great use case that, I mean, we all who have worn these things know we're not there yet. But I think there's an in-between where we actually use a little bit of AI in the form of machine learning and the cameras that we have on our phones and on our laptops to track us. There's that amazing Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg demo that I wrote about extensively on Substack. And so you can see my longer thoughts on it there. But basically, you can do avatars that look that good. You don't need to wear a headset. To some extent, actually, it'd be a bit easier to just use your laptop and machine learning to essentially put that avatar on you. And you can do other tricks like simulating 3D on a 2D screen so that you actually can make eye contact with somebody. So I actually think that there's going to be a few years here where we're at least also going to have the ability to do kind of 3D and 2D in new ways that gets us kind of partway there to feeling together.
That's great. Can you elaborate? I love this quote. Metaverses and virtual worlds don't have to be distilled.
Right. Well, the funny line that everybody says lately, and Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, of course, which is such a reference for everybody, that the joke people have been making that I thought was, pretty appropriate in the last few years was, it was a warning, not an instruction manual.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a little too stark. But I do think though that, it's often easier for us to imagine dystopias, right? Because we worry about the future. And of course, right now, there are tons of reasons to worry about real dystopian outcomes for metaverses, like advertising. We can't do advertising in them. There's other things we can't do too. We can't have AIs be our boyfriends and girlfriends. That also will lead us to despair, if we do that. But there are plenty of ways to create, I would say, protopian outcomes, not dystopian, but protopian. I'd make that, Kevin Kelly made that expression, protopia, that I think is a very, very good, positive idea of a world where everybody is always able to kind of improve their own lot a little bit, in contrast to a utopia, which is the problem with utopias is they're made for one mindset. They're made for one type of person, right? The author, the reader, and then everybody else gets screwed, So I think the goal we want is a protopian outcome, and we absolutely can do that. And we absolutely can build metaverses and virtual worlds that have those properties. And you're right. Unfortunately, it is very easy for us when we think about those places or write about them or make films about them to pick dystopian topics. But that's only because dystopian stuff is the most terrifying and exciting.
Totally makes sense. But it's also a heat or calling card regarding what people should just be careful of when they're building stuff.
Yeah.
Talking about AI, we checked out Runway Gen 2, where they're able to basically have AI full feature films, but generative. We're now at the cusp where it still hallucinates a bit. It's not really fluid. And I know you advise for Midjourney, who I work with that function. I've always had this thesis that we're getting close to where you can relive all of your most sacred moments on social media, relive those actually in a virtual world.
Yeah.
How far do you think we're from there, considering that AI is advanced so quickly?
Well, AI being a purely software phenomenon, for the most part. I mean, of course, it's software and fast hardware, but it is enjoying a kind of a Moore's Law run up right now. And while I wouldn't say that we're there quite yet with respect to the ability to create, say, a feature film that people want to watch, we're very close. And I think you're right. We're going to see whether there are advances in turning us into avatars, like I touched on earlier, or wholly synthetic things like 3D environments. I think, like what you see with Midjourney, I think when you imagine something like Midjourney able to create completely three-dimensional content, that is just going to be bonkers. I mean, we're close to it. We're not quite there yet. But the relentless progress in AI is going to make it happen very quickly. So I think that will be exciting. And I think almost all of the AI stuff is just years away. I mean, we're just making awfully rapid progress now. I've never seen, in our lab here, we're working on a bunch of different projects. A number of them are with AI. And I've never seen anything moving so quickly, even compared to, say, the internet in the early 90s or smartphone apps, in 2010, things like that. I think this is a exceptionally unusual moment in history.
What's the next move regarding IRL 415?
Well, IRL is this experiment we've been doing just in kind of how do you bring a community together in real life, here in San Francisco, and get people sitting at desks with each other again and prototyping and working on new ideas. Pretty early. We've been kind of doing that here all year and playing with a bunch of different ideas. And what's next is come and find us. We've got a website and we've got a wonderful lab here where we're inviting people to reach out to us and bring us ideas. We're trying to focus on hard technology that makes sense to get people face to face to work on together, and then technology that can be used for good, like many of the things that we've been talking about in this conversation, where we're trying to focus only on those positive applications. Again, I don't want to be gloom and doom, but if you're a technologist and you're not thinking about using technology in positive ways right now, I beg you to reconsider.
A couple of last questions. One is regarding universal basic income. I almost think of Second Life can be that model.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Is it way off?
I have written a lot about economic systems because of Second Life. And one of the projects that we work on here at the lab is called FairShare. And it is, and I've written about it on Substack, on Medium, fairshare.social is the website. It is a mechanism for changing the low-level rules of a money system to make the idea of a basic income that's self-funding in the money system automatic in a distributed technology. So it's basically like, think of it as like a next version of crypto, but the version that we actually wanted in terms of giving us a way to buy and sell things from each other day to day and live our lives in a completely different way. Cryptocurrency in many ways, unfortunately, although it's interesting technology, but in many ways it has almost accelerated and demonstrated kind of the worst of both capitalism and then traditional money systems. It's almost like a neat package that has the worst of everything in it. But if you change the rules of crypto a little bit, if you do another version of it, you can change it to have concepts like a perpetual basic income basically built into it. And I'm not the only one who's looking at this, but I would say that I think fixing money in the way that I think some of the good-hearted people at the beginning of crypto were wanting to do is a huge opportunity and maybe a necessity for us to get ourselves through the next few years where we have increasing wealth inequality driven by technology, and certainly things like AI.
That's wonderful. I've always asked this, what are your predictions in the short term and in the long term regarding all of this technology focused on the metaverse?
Well, I think that there's going to continue to be, and some of this is driven by the instability of the world we live in, there's going to continue to be a lot of interesting experimentation in how we form groups and how we form communities. I think in some ways we're struggling to find organisms larger than ourselves. And we have nation states and we have corporations. And neither of them both feel pretty old. Corporations feel kind of savage and old, and so do nation states. And I think that a lot of the experiments with tech in the next few years, I hope to be involved in this, will be ones that try to rewrite the rules of what is a community, maybe what is a country, what is money, how do people support each other. And I'd like to see us start experimenting with these ideas in a bunch of different ways. And that's where a lot of our lab's work and a lot of my own personal passion and thinking is for the coming years.
Fantastic. Any parting words before you celebrate Halloween? I know Phil's got this haunted house that he's going to be hosting tonight, but parting words for everyone here?
Well, I guess stay curious, right? Stay curious. I think it's there's so many strange things going on in the world that it's easy to get focused on one thing, distressed, obviously anxious, but at the same time, there's so much opportunity, like no matter what happens with tech, we have so much more agency and ability than we had, say, at any time in human history. So we can do anything next. And I'm excited to see what we end up doing.
Fantastic. I can speak with you for hours, but I know you got to go. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, good to be here. Yeah, thanks.